Welcome to Gold Derby. I'm senior editor Denton Davidson here with Peter Berg, director of the Showtime docuseries Boys in Blue. It spotlights the Minneapolis North High Polars football team who are coached and mentored by members of the Minneapolis Police Department in the aftermath of the police killing of George Floyd. So, Peter, how did you hear about these kids and what drew you to this story as a filmmaker?
So I went to a college in St. Paul, Minnesota, a school called McAllister College, in the late 80s. And I lived in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, for anyone that doesn't know, for 5 years of my life. And they were some of the happiest years of my life. It was kind of a magical time in the Twin Cities. Prince was just kind of blowing up. And we used to go see Prince concerts at First Avenue, a great club, a nightclub, music venue in Minneapolis. And it was that the Prince shows were a big part of my education. Probably got more out of Prince concerts than I did out of college. But my memories specifically were of an incredibly peaceful place, a very nice place. The Twin Cities were kind of like the nice cities in America, and I remember a real diversity. I remember going to Prince shows with very large African American, white, Hispanic. There was a large Vietnamese population in Twin Cities, and I just remember everybody getting along very well. It was a very happy place to be, a peaceful place. And when the George Floyd killing occurred, I was devastated, and I was further devastated when I found out that it was in the Twin Cities. That Derek Chauvin was a Minneapolis police officer. And I think, like many filmmakers, writers, artists, I felt compelled to have some sort of a creative response to the George Floyd killing. I was trying to kind of figure out what I wanted to do. I had a couple of ideas for documentaries. I then read an article in the New York Times about the Minneapolis North football program, a football program that was coached by Minneapolis police officers, several of which worked with Derek Chauvin. The school was in the area where George Floyd was killed. And in the middle of all this was this really great football program that was kids that were living in this community being coached by police officers who patrolled in that community. I thought that sounded like a very interesting way in to the story, to the world that I wanted to respond to, and that was the beginning of it.
And one of the things that struck me was when you get there, like just speaking to the parents, like that's one of the first things we see is you're speaking to the parents of these kids on these football teams, and they're just talking about being worried about the kid going to the bus stop or if they're going to make it home from school that day. What was it like to get into those homes, and how do you navigate getting the trust of those people to tell their story in a proper way?
Yeah, that's a good question, and obviously, getting access and getting trust and being allowed in is essential. And generally, and I've done films about real stories like Lone Survivor, Patriots Day, Deepwater Horizon, and all of those films involve people who had died, and I had to get the trust of the communities, the families, the oil rig community, the Navy SEAL community, the Boston Police Department and FBI, and just in general, the Boston community for those films. And what I do is, go early without cameras, sit down and kind of just meet the people, meet the community, and say, this is who I am. This is the kind of work I've made. I would like to try and learn more about your community, more about your experience. If you let me in, I promise you, I'll give you my very best. And I'll try and tell your stories as honestly as I can. If you don't want me, respect, and I understand that. And it was a process. And so there were a couple of trips out to Minneapolis to meet with Officer Adams, who was the head coach of that program, meet with some of the police officers, then meet with the families of the players, meet with the players, meet with the school. And over the course of a month or so, we slowly, received the permission and the blessings from the community to come in. They liked us, they trusted us, and we were very fortunate that we were able to get kind of deep into the community.
And we were talked offline a little bit about this, but I was a member of this community when you were filming. I lived there for 15 years, so I was in these conversations and heard them, and I think that's what this series does so brilliantly is there's so many talking heads that we see on national news with so many opinions about what's going on, but here you have police officers, community members, kids, on all sides of the spectrums having these conversations. What was it like? What did you think you were going to get when you started this documentary, and how did your story sort of shift throughout the process?
Right. I think, one of the motivating factors for me and everyone else involved in making this, I'm just, I was the director, but we had an incredible crew of field producers, and cameramen and sound men that were out there every day. And I think we all felt that we were beyond oversaturated by the talking heads that you're talking about. That the George Floyd killing was, obviously extremely polarizing. Almost everyone that I've ever met acknowledged that it was murder and that Derek Chauvin deserved everything that he got. But that the George Floyd killing was opening up, all of these very polarized views on guns, on policing, on race, on education. And depending on which news service you were watching, you were fed sort of the company line. My goal and my hope was that by going in a film verite style of filmmaking, meaning we're just going to try and capture the truth, see what puts the news cycles aside, and try and go in and immerse ourselves in a more complex, nuanced reality, in terms of what is it like to be living in an American city today? What is it like to be living in a neighborhood like Minneapolis North, which is a very rough neighborhood, which has a lot of issues. Poverty, I think, being top of the list. People are just really hard pressed to get money in these communities. What does it really feel like and look like and sound like to go deep into a community like this? And it was, our hope that we might be able to provide anyone that was interested in this subject a more nuanced look to see how, a community like Minneapolis North was interacting with police officers. Was it what we expected? Did they hate the cops? Did they want to defund the cops? Or perhaps was there a more complex relationship going on? And in the case of the community and the police specifically, I think we found that no, they don't all hate the cops. And we were very surprised to see that, it was the Minneapolis North that was championing not defunding the police force more than some of the other wealthier communities that lived on the outskirts that thought maybe they were doing the right thing. That was something I suspected might be true, but we found it to be quite true.
Well, some of my favorite scenes happened in that barber shop. And just because it got so real when those guys are talking to each other, because you've got a black police officer, there's like a rapper and other members of the community that disagree on these subjects, and it gets heated. But then at the end of them, they're just like, okay, cut my hair and hurry up. And then they laugh. I mean, these are the discussions that communities need to be having that aren't. So I think it's just so great to be able to watch them being had. What were some of the moments that you liked seeing come together for this the most in terms of that?
Yes, I mean the conversations in the barber shop were quite stimulating and very spirited, and I think an interesting portal into just human intelligence, because these are very bright people who have very strong and well articulated opinions, but it's and also, to me, because you pointed out that, yes, they would have these intense debates and then they would laugh and they would take a shot of, whiskey and cut hair and just love each other. And, it was a reminder to me that, even in a community that is really ground zero and has been so challenged, where people have very, very strong opinions, they're able to put those aside after a certain point and just try to enjoy the experience of being alive and being a human, which I've found inspiring. But I think, to me, the most powerful moment of the show is the very first scene, which is a scene that had been edited in early on, which is our quarterback's mother, Deshaun Hill's mother, and for anyone that doesn't know, our quarterback was murdered 3 days before we stopped shooting, Deshaun Hill, and he was murdered leaving high school, walking to the bus. And the first scene of the film, which was shot and edited long before Deshaun Hill was killed, was Tuesday Hill, Deshaun's mother, talking to us about how her biggest fear was what would happen to her son leaving school, walking to the bus, and that she felt that that's where he might get hurt. And when I found out that Deshaun Hill was murdered walking to the bus, I was floored. I was humbled, and the reality. We hear about the dangers in cities. We hear about the threats to young lives, and I get that, and I've heard it, and I've always sort of understood it viscerally. But when we were filming, it's in the film. You can hear gunshots, and we would hear about someone that was, shot or attacked 2 days prior over there, a couple blocks away. And that always sort of felt over there. And it's easy to sort of, the way our psychology likes to organize things, unless it's absolutely unavoidable, we contextualize it, right? Okay, that's horrible, but it was over there. When Deshaun Hill was killed, it wasn't over there. It was right where we were. And the reality of what is happening in these cities was no longer an intellectual experience for me and everyone involved. It was a very visceral experience. It became in us, in our DNA. And so that scene, Tuesday Hill, when I look back, I feel like she was really almost pleading with us to understand, and at the time I didn't understand. I heard it, but I didn't understand. She wasn't just telling me a story. She was asking for help and asking me to pay attention. And we're all paying a bit more attention now. Certainly,
Yeah.
everyone's involved.
And you see him on a date like 2 days before. I mean, that's the most heartbreaking part of the documentary, is just, I mean, he was already the focus. And I mean, you could have just never seen that end coming in that way.
No, and I remember telling, to go back to our original question of what was it like to get access, and to get that access, we have to come down and we have to be honest and say, we want to let cameras roll in your world. And that's obviously an invasive experience for anyone. And if someone says, well, okay, but what are you going to get? And I would say, I have no idea. You're following a football season, and I've done a lot of football stuff. And the one thing I know about football, anybody does about sports, is you never know what's going to happen. And so I was talking about the unpredictability of a football season, and I was aware that obviously you don't know what's going to happen to characters off the field. But when I got the call, I was, as you say, 2 days. Deshaun was killed 2 days after that date, and 3 days before we were going to wrap up filming. So I was in Canada working on something else, and I got the call that D Hill had been murdered. And the reality that you just don't know what you're going to get when you go into these kinds of unscripted territory hit hard. And just I don't know, the insane randomness and how difficult it can be to contextualize or process human life hit me like a freight train. It was just horrible. It made no sense. And it was all within the confines of what we had agreed upon to shoot, from a month and a half prior to first game to a month after last game. And this occurred within that time frame. It's very difficult to make sense of.
And it was like 12:30 in the afternoon, completely unprovoked. Like it was just
There was no logic. Deshaun Hill was an honor roll student. He had a beautiful family. Parents were married, two beautiful younger sisters, no criminal history, no drug use. This was a kid who was doing everything right, who was part of a family who was doing everything the way, we're told to do it. And to walk by the wrong person in broad daylight and get shot in the back of the head like that, I will never understand.
I mean, I keep telling everyone everyone has to see this documentary just because of the conversations that it's having. I mean, it's Friday Night Lights, but it's also, the socioeconomics and politics. It's all wrapped into one, and it's just so beautifully told. I know everyone asks you this every time you talk to anyone now, but I have to be the latest just in case there's ever an exclusive. What's up with Rihanna? What's going on with that documentary?
It's almost done
Oh,
soon. She's
so
she's an extraordinary woman who just keeps evolving, and so we, as a filmmaking team, keep evolving. But I don't know. It's originally we all thought it was going to be kind of a quick shoot, quick edit, put it out there. And I think one of the things I love about working with Rihanna and making this film is it's now been 7 years, and rather than just kind of a quick semi-disposable film, I think we're starting to really capture the breadth of a human life as she matures and continues to grow in new areas. So soon.
well, we're looking forward to that. And Pete Berg, everything you do is so great. Boys in Blue, it's on Showtime now. I think every American owes it to themselves to watch this. It's just so well done. It's an amazing story told through the lens of this high school football team and their coaches. And Pete, thanks for sitting down and chatting with Gold Derby today.
Hey, buddy, it's my pleasure. Nice to meet you.